Hey everybody, Brandon here, welcome back to a new video. Today we're going to be covering the 20th game on my road to chess mastery. And this is the final game of the tournament. This is round number 5. I won my first game, drew the next, won the next, and then lost my fourth game. So I am recovering from a loss, and luckily this is the last game of the tournament. And usually, when you lose, you tend to, some people tend to streak. I'm one of those people definitely where I lose one and I start losing continuously. So I was really worried going into this game because I knew my tendencies and I wanted to avoid that as much as possible. So I'm playing with the white pieces against Stefan, and let's see how the game progresses. I played e4 and e6. So this is something new. We haven't seen e6 yet in tournament play. So let's see what happens. I played d4, so this is the classical setup, and d5. So some of you may know I play the exchange French, but here I did not. And after knight to c3, bishop to b4, I played e5. This is just a normal move. The whole point is now, after bishop to b4, there's no threat to take and then win the pawn. e5, now the pawn can't be captured, so the pin isn't as important anymore. However, bishop takes c3, pawn takes c3, and now we have doubled pawns, which actually can play a huge role in this type of position, especially after the move c5 in some cases. Of course, it's not quite right yet. Now, after b takes c3, we see a bit of a weird move from my opponent. They played the move bishop to d7, and it makes sense. They're trying to improve this piece. However, this is one of the worst pieces in their position, and usually if you want to try, it might even make more sense to go b6 and bishop a6 at the right time. However, here, bishop to d7 is just a waste of time, and a move like queen to g4 highlights that immediately, where if king f8, then bishop a3, knight e7, and bishop to d3, and as we can see here, white has pretty much every piece in the game, and this is a bit of a worry. White stands much better in this position. So instead, I played knight to f3 because I wasn't interested in the queen g4 lines. I didn't realize how good they were for white, so I just avoided them altogether. And h6, bishop e2. So bishop d3 is objectively a little bit better if I was going to move this bishop, because you want to control the f5 square, which is a very important square, especially for this knight. And after h6, bishop e2, we can also, instead of bishop e2, go bishop a3, which also makes a lot of sense because this is a very important diagonal. We're preventing moves like c5, and the more we can prevent from black with this type of position, the better, because they have a space disadvantage. So the more we can restrict them, the better. But okay, bishop e2, knight e7, castles, a6, and knight to d2. So knight to d2 I don't like. Knight to d2, instead move like a4 makes more sense because they have ideas of bishop to b5 in the position. And a4 prevents bishop to b5, and it also prevented their idea that they wanted to play in the game. But a move like a4 actually does a really good job restricting my opponent, and this is just definitely what I should have played. And b5 is not possible because we can take it, and don't forget that the rook on a is undefended here, so b5 takes. If bishop takes, then bishop takes, pawn takes, and we win the rook. So this would not be possible. However, after knight d2, my opponent has the move bishop to b5. They did not end up playing this, but the whole point is they trade off their worst piece in the position for one of my best pieces, especially if it's on d3. It's looking directly at the h7 square. And a position like this can occur, and this definitely is better for black because as someone who plays the Caro-Kann, so that's something I worked on for quite some time, about a year or two of practice with it. I've noticed that these types of structures are often really nice to have as black, even though you don't have complete control of the c5 square. A well-timed b6 can easily deal with that. And usually there's no weaknesses. b7 is the only weakness now, and since you have two knights, it's very easy to get them into the game. So there's no doubt that black has achieved everything they wanted in this position. But okay, my opponent played b5 instead. And this isn't so great because it just weakens the c5 square even more, where only 2 of their pieces can defend it. So in a dream scenario, I trade off my bishops for both of their knights, and I have a knight on c5 versus their bishop on d7. And this is what you call the good knight versus the bad bishop. It can be very, very dangerous for the person with the bad bishop, especially in this case because the position is very closed. So a knight on c5 and all the other pieces off, all the other minor pieces off, we can see that it just restricts our opponent and just completely freezes them. So b5, I played knight b3, so I am immediately looking at the c5 square, which I think is definitely a good sign. This is something that I should be doing. And they admit that bishop d7 was kind of not a great move, and they played bishop to c8 here. After bishop to c8, I played bishop to d3. It does also make more sense to just go bishop to a3 instead, just covering c5 and also just looking at this diagonal, because this is a very nice diagonal to look at. But bishop to d3 is definitely an improvement on the bishop that was on e2. So they admit that they made a bit of a silly move, and I admit that I made a silly move with bishop to e2. Now we see knight to d7, so they're controlling c5 a little bit more. And now I play queen to g4, attacking the g7 square. g6, bishop to a3, now controlling c5 just a little bit more. Knight to f5. And here I made a questionable choice. I took on f5. Instead, move like queen f3 is completely reasonable. And the reason why I say it's reasonable is because we're always going to have the option to take on f5. Why should we take immediately when it's just giving black more options? As if we take, well, they took the wrong way, but if they take with the g-pawn, even though they have this awkward h-pawn, it's not actually that big of a deal because, well, they have an open file against my king. So as long as they can, get their pieces out, then it's fair to say that black has counterplay in this position. Whether or not they're better is a completely different story, but there is play in this position, and this is something that should not be allowed. But they took with the e-pawn. And the problem is now I will always have this e6 idea, and this will completely rip open the king side. g6 will be weak, and the king will just be completely open, and it's pretty hard to castle this way, because if I ever move the bishop away, then there's a4, and either way, one of the sides can be opened quite easily. However, will it be? Is the real question. So I play queen f3 because my queen's attacked, bishop b7, and rook f to e1. Rook f to e1 is a completely reasonable move. It just prepares e6, and after e6, it's fair to say that white has a near winning advantage because black's king is just completely in the open, and this just looks terrible when you look at it. But my opponent found a good move with knight to f8. And here's my mistake. Strategically, this is a very bad move, and this is pretty much what loses me all of my advantage. I should have taken on f8. Remove the defender of the e6 square, or after king takes f8, just e6. And there's no time for f6 to close the position down because e7 wins the queen. So I for some reason did not go for this. I didn't know why. I played knight to c5, and unfortunately after bishop to c8, now they cover the square quite sufficiently. Objectively, there might still be an advantage with e6, or even queen to g3 is reasonable, trying to target c7 if possible, but realistically it's pretty easy for black to close things down, and it's very hard to make progress afterwards. So rook to e2, and this is just an equal position. Knight e6 takes, pawn takes, and it's hard to make any targets here. So I ended up going for queen f4, just admitting, yeah, this is pretty much just a draw, and there's no breakthroughs in this position anymore. So we play a few moves here, and I just close the position down further, bring my king to the best possible square on b4, and then that's it. So I was just hoping maybe I can get king c5 in, but even then after king c5, there's no progress to be made, and yeah, there's nothing I can really do other than possibly sacrifice the exchange, which would not be good in the first place. So It was a draw. It was agreed to a draw in this position. So it's unfortunate. I did miss a very important win with, if we go all the way back here, bishop takes f8, king takes f8. Rook takes f8 isn't much better because e6 and f6. There's also e7, and we're forking the rook and the queen. And of course, not to mention that after king takes, e6, pawn takes, and rook takes, this you can already tell is just bad because we have the good knight versus the bad bishop. We can easily reroute the knight to e5. And this, when you look at these types of positions, strategically, white has a winning position. Most computers, I guarantee, will say this is like +4 or +5. And there's not really much black can do here. There's no counterplay. White just has better pieces, and that's that. So unfortunate, but it happens. Sometimes you miss your wins and you miss your chances, but then you learn about that for next time. And I made sure to never forget about the good knight versus bad bishop positions. And anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you then.